everybody, welcome back to Dinner Church. Matt here with Joanna and Dean, continuing on our series on the Sermon on the Mount that we're calling Mountaintop, and this week our episode is called Law School. So, as I always do, a little story. I work with mental hooks. That's just who I am.
It's good.
So a number of years ago, this person sent me this video, and it was a video where and we'll link it for you. Someone had taken an old cheesy Jesus movie and had overdubbed all kinds of voices in it.
I think I know what you're talking about.
I think it's hilarious. And so it's all about like Jesus like walking around all these people and telling them everything they had done wrong. So I just jotted down some of them, and again, if you want to watch it, we'll toss up the link for you. So he says to Peter, "Yeah, you lied to your mother the other day." He says to John, "You drank too much wine the other night. Not way too much wine, but just enough to make me angry." He says to Thomas, "You were slow dancing a little too close to your girlfriend." Thaddeus, "I hate to say I saw you stick up your middle finger the other day as you were riding your camel." Like just silly stuff. Jacob, "I don't mind you saying my name, but just not after you stub your toe."
And then you're not wearing your "What Would Jesus Do" bracelet.
That's right, the "What Would Jesus Do" bracelet. And then one last one, good. Frank, "You know what you did, I just can't repeat it because I'm Jesus."
Frank, get it together.
Frank the disciple.
Oh, man.
But it does, I think, spark up sometimes a caricature of who Jesus was and what he came to do.
Yeah.
Did he just come to convict us and tell us everything we've done wrong? And is the way of Jesus simply following all this checklist of laws and do this and don't do that because he's just peering over you, watching you? And in this section of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is talking about the law, the Old Testament law that the people would have been very familiar with. And he's explaining a little bit about that. So it's an interesting one, but let's jump into it here. So who wants to kick us off? Diener?
Sure, yeah. Well, first of all, yes. It's just all about obedience and doing things so Jesus can't see you. Right?
Do it in secret.
Do it in secret, yeah. Wait, oh shoot.
No,
but this idea of I love the line, "Everything is accomplished." And I wonder what might this mean? Like he's, coming to not end the idea of law, but that it's fulfilled, right? And when does this happen? That's something that I always wonder about in this. Is this like a Calvary, on the hill, on the cross kind of moment? Is this a resurrection, like the empty tomb? Is this the life after resurrection that we're all experiencing where the law is being fulfilled? Was it happening in the moment, as he was saying? You have heard that it was said, but I tell you.
Right.
So I just love wondering about what is the kind of timeline of all of this stuff where there was a whole culture and religion and group of people who built their lives on following the law. And then here comes Jesus and it's it's kind of wrapping up. We're going to finish. It's not going away. It's not like we're throwing it completely out. However, we're going to tweak it, upgrade it. Some things are going to be completed, fulfilled. There's lots to pick up in there.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Is it him? Is it his actions? Is it his words? Is it the actions of his followers?
Yeah.
Where and how does all that happen?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that the law, in theory, the laws that God gave were for the benefit of people. And then when you start to live, you realize you just can't be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do all the laws that we all know, that, even if it's the, you drank a little bit but not too much, or you put up your middle finger when you cut someone off riding your camel the other day, all this kind of we know even at the jokes that the law is actually, the law is in don't drink too much, and the law is in don't flip people off. That is actually the better way to live.
Yeah.
We know that the laws of God are the best way. However, the burden of having to do them perfectly is too much for a person. It is too much. It doesn't mean we shouldn't try to live because I think it is the best way to live our life. Mm-hmm. However, it's a burden if we have no relief from it.
Right.
And so when Jesus says he's not here to abolish it but to fulfill it, he's not lighting it all on fire and saying, forget all this stuff. It doesn't matter anymore. It's still a good idea to don't murder and don't steal and don't commit adultery and take a day off every week, these 10 commandments as the baseline. It is still a really good idea.
Yeah, yes.
But the fulfillment means this isn't the thing that will make God be pleased with you. It's not like the measuring stick anymore of like our relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, because if you're trying to live by the law in order to please God,
Yeah.
you could just never do it.
Right.
Yeah.
It's completely unattainable.
Yeah.
It makes me think of like, you know, you might have a similar experience, but like when we were kids and we started to get some more responsibilities around the house and our parents maybe showed us how to use the stove. There are some pretty strict rules. We could even call them laws.
Yeah.
Don't touch the element when it is hot. You will get burned and it's painful and it's, you know, could be really
Yeah.
bad. Or don't put something on the stove and walk away and go do something else because it could be a really bad situation. You could start a fire, blah, blah, blah. So there were some strict things that we had to adhere to as like beginners in the kitchen. You didn't want to get burned. You didn't want to cause a kitchen fire, anything like this. But then as we do it, the need for those laws to be enforced upon us or us to follow, like you don't need to every time you make it be like, oh, I
Don't
need
touch
to-
that thing.
Don't
Yeah.
touch that thing.
Like, you
just
kind of already know, yeah.
And even, you know, maybe the more important one of like, or not more important, but potentially more dangerous is like the leaving something on the element and walking away. Like as an adult, it's not a wise thing, but we all do it because we know, okay, in the back of my mind, I need to go check on that. But the general rule would still be like, don't walk away from something on the stove.
Yeah.
Not because something bad is going to happen, but there's the potential for that. And I sometimes view some of these ideas of law and it's fulfilled is like, okay, you understand that it's not best practice to like walk away, but like the end of the world isn't going to come about if you do. But earlier, you're a kid, you get distracted, all of a sudden something's burning back there, and it is a really big deal.
Right.
But we've kind of grown up in a way to understand which ones we can kind of massage gently away from, but the purpose of them is still there. So I sometimes think about it like in that context.
Yeah.
But then, like, I wonder what we do with this last line. Unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. That is, if you're not better at doing the laws than the most religious, rule-bound people, you certainly will not enter the kingdom of heaven. Like, you know, we kind of know, we three sitting here can fast forward in the story and have some context of like Jesus's sacrificial death to make a way for us for all the stuff we didn't do. But like when you're hearing this, just how would that feel?
Yeah.
Like you got to be better than the most religious person you know
Yeah.
if you want God.
Yeah.
Like it feels impossible. And it's like, I just wonder why Jesus would say it this way. It just feels like bad marketing,
Yeah.
you know, as a communications marketing kind of a person myself, like this, if I was thinking of like how to start a religion, how to start a following, like I think I'd make it easier for people than this.
Yeah.
This sounds impossible.
And that, I agree with you. And then it makes me think, so what would it be like as I'm hearing you talk about it? And I think, well, then maybe it's compelling for people to lean in then. Because if he's presenting a way that seems impossible, and yet he's talking about coming to fulfill and bring something new, then it make me want to be like, so what's he going to say next then?
Yeah.
That will then, because it feels completely impossible, but there has to be something more.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that first line for me is really interesting, where it says, don't misunderstand why I have come. So I don't know what the talk would have been behind the scenes about Jesus, or as he's sharing his teaching, what the grumblings might have been, thinking he's only coming, he's tearing everything down, he's wrecking anything. But when he's saying he's come to fulfill, he's like, I'm not getting rid of that. I'm just bringing a more full, complete picture of what you've been trying to do.
Yeah.
But then I want to lean in on his teaching. So what is that then?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess that's where, like, for us as readers and having a conversation about this, and then for them, like, it wasn't like they just heard this soundbite. If you heard
Right.
this soundbite and kept walking, it doesn't make sense.
No.
But it's like, what does this say within the context of the entire Sermon on the Mount?
Yes.
Within the context of the life of Jesus? Within context of the canon, like all the books of the Bible, the Scripture? Within the context of the life of the church for 2,000 years? Like, we have to go from this. If it doesn't make sense, go a little bit, zoom out a little bit. If it still doesn't make sense, keep zooming out, out. Because reading just this section feels
Yes.
quite discouraging if you don't have more content. Even just, all we have to do is, what does he mean by that? We go to like next week's discussion.
Yes.
Like the next episode of discussion gives us even just a little bit more context than we have here.
Right.
Yeah, I know when I was reading it through again, just like thinking about this conversation, I was like, it is it's one for the Pharisees. Like, there's a lot of Jesus being like, these guys, and we can look at them. But I was like, it's kind of interesting that he kind of gives them one, but it ups the ante for us to be like, oh man, like those people were like pious upon pious to the point that they missed it, and we know that like they were rule obsessed,
right,
and would keep the rule, but actually violate like the purpose or the heart of the rule. And so I don't think that's what Jesus is inviting us to, but I wonder if it's this idea of like righteousness. But it's still, it settles weird because like it becomes almost competitive. Like you want your righteousness to surpass that of the Pharisees. It's like, it's a tall order, but it is this invitation to, I think, wonder about what does that look like for me? But even backing up, I love the line before where it's like, it's kind of almost the opposite. Therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. So even if you like mess it up beforehand, he's saying, yeah, you're still in, you'll just be called least. Which is like an interesting thing. It's not like if you keep them and misteach them, like you're out and you're condemned.
That's
Right.
interesting.
It's this, like, and to me, it's just like, there's so
interesting.
much grace there that you can not only like set them aside and teach others accordingly to set these things aside, you'll be called least.
Right.
And then it leads us into the whole thing about like the last shall be first. And like, I'm like, wait, so is there something happening in there that like we need to drill in on more? But I just love that there's grace built into it, even if you're kind of off the mark.
Yeah. But you're also not off the hook.
Yes, totally
It's not a religion for the religious professionals.
Yes.
Because he's saying actually be better than the religious professional.
Right, yeah.
And I think all three of us here are sometimes considered religious professionals. Certainly by people out in the grocery store, that's
Yeah.
what they would think of me.
Right.
And they're saying like actually like be better. Like it's not that hard. The bar's not that high. But like be better than
if you
me.
really knew.
Yeah.
Be better
Yeah.
than you. Be more devoted.
Yeah.
Than the most religious professionally person you know.
Yeah.
I just mean that like actually we're all involved is
Yes.
maybe what I'm really trying to come back
Yeah.
to, is that it's not just for those people there and it's good for them, and now it's Jesus is calling everyone to pay attention to what he's talking
Right.
about and be concerned about things of the kingdom of God.
Right. And maybe like, just again, like letting our imagination wander, maybe there was kind of a culture where people understood, the Pharisees, like they're super important and they know all the rules, but they're kind of jerks.
Yeah.
Like they kind of keep us regular folk from full participation. And so maybe in Jesus saying like, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees, like you understand the law, but you also understand and live the heart of the law, like, 'cause that would be surpassing it, right? So they have the knowledge, they have like the knowledge, but they don't let it translate to like their heart, and they don't let it always shape their living. Like they're so rigid on the rules that it's like, no, you need to know the rules, but also know the reason behind it and know that like the heartbeat for it, right? Don't violate the Sabbath. However, like we see Jesus do that because it brings the heart of God into, it's more important to help someone, to save someone, to pursue righteousness on the Sabbath than be like, well, can't do it. So maybe in that way, that's the invitation to surpass the righteousness of the Pharisees. Don't just know and abide by the rules in such a black and white way,
Yeah.
but actually allow the heart of the rules to penetrate into you and live by that ethic. So I wonder if there is a bit of that going on in there too.
Yeah, I like that. The I have come, if we just say I have come, that's to me the idea of the incarnation, that God would come and dwell and be here. To me, when Jesus starts that way, this section, it feels like in the midst of all this talk about law and surpassing righteousness, it's just a reminder for me, like Jesus showed up.
Yeah.
He's showing up to produce and to provide a better way and to teach and to invite people into participation, into fullness of life. And it's just, I'm like, oh yeah, like Jesus, God came. He came and dwelt among us.
Yeah.
The Word became flesh. All these things, lines that we use, I have come. I'm like, oh man, that's what we're all talking about in all of this.
Yeah.
That Jesus showed up. And this whole conversation is about how to allow the teachings of Jesus, not just to understand them, but to, like you were saying, Dean, to penetrate and bring transformation and change in us because Jesus showed up.
Yeah.
I love that. That's why we're doing all this stuff, right?
Yeah,
So-
totally.
Yeah.
It makes me think of, not to pull ourselves out of the Sermon on the Mount in this story, but it does make me think of like another mountaintop story where Jesus is involved. The fancy word is the Transfiguration, right? Where a few of the disciples see Jesus at the top of this hill, and here he says, "Do not think I've come to abolish the law and the prophets." And in this vision, in this experience of this Transfiguration, they see Jesus and they see Moses and Elijah, representation of the law and the prophets, and what's left after the vision happens is just Jesus, and they hear the voice of God saying, "This is my son, listen to him."
Yeah.
And so it's not like a condemnation of Moses and Elijah, like they're bad and they're gone and forget about them, but it's like this is now the new way, the new voice, the new law and prophet to listen to, and it's like building upon and following the tradition of, right? And it doesn't mean that it's garbage or bad or obsolete, but just like this is the purest now, the clearest expression
beauty.
of like what I want to be, and Jesus is giving us that in this mountaintop experience, in this Sermon on the Mount.
And maybe as another thing that triggers immediately for me when you're talking about he's building upon, it's like, so he was building upon like a Middle Eastern Jewish Palestinian tradition, like whatever you want to call it. Maybe some of those words are politicized, but the point is, like, let's not make Jesus in our own image.
Right.
Yes.
He's building upon a tradition and a history, and came incarnationally, came in flesh in a particular time, place, culture, skin. So like, let's not make a white Jesus or whatever else we might make of him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's great. All right, let's pause. Over to you guys. Lots of good conversation. Bless you as you dig in on this one. Enjoy the food, and the conversation. We'll pick this up next time. Peace.